My name is Marvella, and I am 70 years old. I sit here today in my small garden apartment in Portland, Oregon, watching the rain tap against the window, and I find myself compelled to tell you a story. It's a story I never thought I would live, let alone tell. For most of my adult life, I believed that romance, real, heart-fluttering, can't sleep at night romance, was something that belonged to the young. I thought love had an expiration date, and mine had long since passed. But I was wrong. What I'm about to share with you is the story of how I found love at 67 years old, not the comfortable companionship that many people settle for in their later years, but genuine, terrifying, exhilarating love. The kind that makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. The kind that forces you to choose between safety and possibility. This is a story about taking risks when your bones ache and your courage feels depleted. It's about discovering that your heart doesn't retire just because your body slows down. And it's about learning that sometimes the greatest adventures of our lives are still waiting for us, even when we think all the interesting chapters have already been written. I want to tell you this story because if you're listening to this and you're wondering whether it's too late for you, whether love has passed you by, I want you to know that it isn't and it hasn't. But I also want to be honest with you about how difficult it can be. Because finding love after 60 is not like dating in your 20s or 30s. The stakes are different. The fears are deeper. The courage required is of an entirely different magnitude. So let me take you back 3 years, to the autumn when everything changed. I had been alone for 8 years. My husband, Douglas, died when I was 59. A heart attack, sudden and merciless, on a Tuesday afternoon while he was raking leaves in our backyard. One moment he was there, complaining about the neighbor's tree that kept dropping branches over our fence. The next moment, he wasn't. The grief was like drowning in slow motion. For months, I moved through the world as if I were underwater, every movement requiring impossible effort. My two daughters, Camille and Jocelyn, hovered around me with worried eyes, bringing casseroles I couldn't taste and offering words of comfort that couldn't penetrate the fog. But eventually, as grief does, it changed. It didn't disappear. I don't think it ever truly does, but it transformed from a sharp, immediate pain into a dull, constant ache that I learned to carry with me. I learned to function again. I returned to my work as a librarian. I attended my book club meetings. I visited my grandchildren. I existed, and I told myself I was content. By the time I turned 67, I had constructed a perfectly acceptable life. I had my routines: morning coffee on the porch, Tuesday night book club, Thursday volunteering at the community center, weekends with my daughters and their families. I had my small circle of friends, mostly other widows and divorcees who understood the particular loneliness of eating dinner alone every night. I had convinced myself that this was enough, that wanting more at my age was somehow greedy or foolish. My daughter Camille, who had inherited her father's bluntness along with his green eyes, disagreed. "Mom," she said to me one Sunday afternoon as we sat in my living room, watching her children play in the yard, "you're not dead. You're just acting like you are." I felt a flash of anger. "I'm perfectly fine, thank you very much." "You're not fine. You're going through the motions." She turned to face me, her expression softening. "When was the last time you did something that genuinely excited you? When was the last time you looked forward to something?" I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it again. I couldn't remember. "I'm not saying you need to get married again or anything," Camille continued, "but maybe you could at least try to meet some people. Go on a date, join a club, something." "I'm in a book club," I protested weakly. A book club where everyone is over 70 and you spend more time complaining about your ailments than discussing literature. She took my hand. "Mom, Dad wouldn't want you to stop living." I pulled my hand away, tears stinging my eyes. "You don't know what he would want." But the truth was, she was right. Douglas had been many things: stubborn, opinionated, occasionally infuriating, but he had also been passionate about life. He would have hated seeing me like this, hollowed out and going through the motions. Still, the thought of dating at my age filled me with a terror so profound I could barely acknowledge it. What if I was too old, too set in my ways? What if my body, with its arthritis and its scars and its 77 years of history, repulsed someone? What if I opened my heart again only to have it broken? It seemed safer to stay as I was. 3 weeks after that conversation with Camille, I was shelving books in the quiet section of the library when I overheard two women talking at a nearby table. "I'm telling you, Sylvia, it changed my life," one of them was saying. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair cut in a sleek bob. I almost didn't do it. I thought, who's going to want to date a 62-year-old grandmother? But then I thought, well, other 62-year-old grandparents, probably. The other woman laughed. "And did you meet anyone?" "I've been on 4 dates in the past 2 months. One was terrible. He spent the entire time talking about his stock portfolio. But the other 3 were actually quite pleasant. And one of them, well, we're seeing each other again next weekend." There was something in her voice, a brightness, a vitality, that made me pause in my shelving. I found myself leaning slightly closer, pretending to organize the same shelf while I listened. "Weren't you scared?" Sylvia asked. "Terrified. My hands were shaking so badly on my first date that I could barely hold my wine glass. But you know what? He was nervous too, and there was something oddly comforting about that. We were both just two older people trying to figure out if there was still room in our lives for something new." After they left, I stood there for a long moment, holding a biography of Teddy Roosevelt, thinking about that word, room. Did I have room in my life for something new, or had I filled every space with routines and safety and the comfortable numbness of predictability? That night, I did something I hadn't done in 8 years. I looked at myself, really looked at myself, in the full-length mirror in my bedroom. I saw a woman with silver hair that I'd let go natural after Douglas died, cut short because it was easier to manage. I saw lines around my eyes and mouth, evidence of 67 years of smiling and frowning and living. I saw a body that had carried 2 children, that had danced and hiked and made love and survived. It wasn't young, but it wasn't hideous either. It was simply the body of a woman who had lived. "You're still here," I said to my reflection. "You're still alive." The next morning, before I could lose my courage, I did something that felt both momentous and ridiculous. I created an online dating profile. The website was called Never Too Late, which I found either encouraging or patronizing, depending on my mood. It was specifically designed for people over 50 looking for companionship, romance, or friendship. I spent 2 hours agonizing over what to write, deleting and rewriting my profile description at least a dozen times. Finally, I settled on something simple: recently widowed librarian looking to rediscover joy in the small moments. I love books, rainy days, and interesting conversations. Not sure what I'm looking for, but willing to find out. For my photo, I used one Jocelyn had taken of me at her daughter's birthday party the previous month. I was laughing at something, and while I could see every wrinkle and age spot, I could also see something I'd forgotten was there: happiness. I hit the submit button before I could change my mind. Then I closed my laptop and wondered what on earth I had just done. The responses started coming within hours, and they ranged from encouraging to disturbing to downright bizarre. There was Melvin, 73, who sent me a message that consisted entirely of, "You look like my third wife. She was okay." There was Reginald, 68, whose profile picture appeared to be from 1985, and whose opening message was a detailed description of his various medical procedures. There was Barnaby, 71, who seemed lovely until our phone conversation revealed that he was looking for someone to take care of his mother, who lived with him. And then there was my first actual date, Wendell, Wendell was 69, a retired accountant with kind eyes and a nervous laugh. We met at a cafe downtown on a Wednesday afternoon. I arrived 15 minutes early, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might be having a medical emergency. I had changed my outfit 4 times. I was wearing perfume for the first time in years. I felt ridiculous and terrified and oddly alive. Wendell was nice, perfectly nice. We talked about our children, our careers, our hobbies. He liked woodworking. I liked reading. He enjoyed jazz. I preferred classical music. The conversation was pleasant and utterly devoid of any spark whatsoever. Halfway through our coffee, I realized with a sinking feeling that this was going to be the pattern. We would have a perfectly acceptable time, exchange pleasantries, and then return to our separate lives, unchanged. Would you like to do this again? Wendell asked as we prepared to leave. I looked at his kind, hopeful face and felt terrible for what I was about to say. I think you're a lovely person, Wendell, but I don't feel a connection. I'm sorry. He nodded slowly, disappointment flickering across his features. I appreciate your honesty. I felt it too, actually. Or rather, I felt the lack of it. We parted ways cordially, and I drove home feeling deflated. Maybe Camille was wrong. Maybe at my age, you didn't get passion and butterflies and connection. Maybe you got pleasant conversations over coffee, and that was supposed to be enough. I went on 3 more dates over the next month. Each one was fine. Each one left me feeling empty. I was ready to delete my profile when I received a message from someone named Corwin. The message was different from the others. It wasn't generic or overly forward or weirdly formal. It said, "Dear Marvella, I read in your profile that you love books and rainy days, which suggests to me that you're someone who appreciates atmosphere and story. I wonder if you might be interested in meeting not for coffee, but for a walk through Powell's books, followed by tea at that little place across the street. I find that you can learn more about a person by watching how they browse a bookstore than you can from an hour of forced conversation. If this sounds appealing, I'd love to hear from you. If not, I wish you well in your search. Corwin." I read the message 3 times. There was something about it, a thoughtfulness, a creativity that intrigued me. I clicked on his profile. Corwin was 72. His profile picture showed a man with a weathered face, silver hair that was slightly too long, and eyes that seemed to hold some private amusement. He described himself as a retired high school English teacher who spent his time reading, hiking, and trying to convince my daughter that I don't need help using my smartphone. His profile essay was longer than most and well written. I'm not looking for someone to complete me. I'm a whole person on my own, thank you very much. But I am looking for someone to share the interesting parts of life with. Someone who still gets excited about ideas and beauty and possibility. Someone who knows that being older doesn't mean being finished. I sat with my laptop for a long time, reading and rereading his words. Then, before I could overthink it, I responded. Dear Corwin, a walk through Powell's sounds infinitely better than another awkward coffee date. How about Saturday afternoon? Marvella. His response came within minutes. Saturday is perfect. 2 p.m. at the entrance on Burnside? I'll be the one trying not to look too eager. I laughed out loud, alone in my living room, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Anticipation. Saturday arrived with unseasonable sunshine, which felt like either a good omen or a cosmic joke, given my love of rainy days. I changed my outfit 5 times, finally settling on comfortable jeans, a soft blue sweater, and the necklace Douglas had given me on our 30th anniversary. I almost took the necklace off, worried it would send the wrong message, then left it on. It was part of my story. Anyone who wanted to know me would need to accept that. I arrived at Powell's at precisely 2 p.m. and saw him immediately. Corwin was standing near the entrance, hands in his pockets, watching the street with that same expression of private amusement I'd seen in his photo. He was taller than I'd expected, a bit stooped in the shoulders, dressed in worn corduroys and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. "Marvella?" he said as I approached, and his face broke into a genuine smile. "Corwin," I replied, offering my hand. He shook it, his grip warm and firm. "I have to confess, I was worried you'd change your mind." "I almost did, about 6 times. He laughed, a rich, unguarded sound. I almost canceled twice myself. Once at midnight last night, when I convinced myself that no one could possibly want to spend an afternoon with a 72-year-old man who talks too much about books. And once this morning, when I realized I have no idea how to do this anymore." His honesty disarmed me. "I have no idea either," I admitted. "This is my 4th date in 2 months, and I've felt completely lost during all of them." "4th date? I'm honored to be number 4. That feels significant somehow." He gestured toward the bookstore entrance. "Shall we?" Fair warning, I have very strong opinions about the mystery section's organizational system. We entered Powell's, that cathedral of books, and something shifted. The nervousness didn't disappear entirely, but it transformed into something else. Excitement, curiosity. Corwin moved through the store with the confidence of a regular, leading me through the color-coded rooms with their floor-to-ceiling shelves. "Tell me," he said as we browsed the fiction section, "when was the last time a book made you cry?" I thought about it. 3 months ago. The Remains of the Day. I'd read it before, years ago, but it hit differently this time. He nodded slowly. "Because you understood Stevens better. The cost of emotional restraint, of letting life pass you by while you maintain perfect composure." I stopped and looked at him. "Yes, exactly that. That's what I love about rereading books at our age," he said, pulling a worn paperback from the shelf and examining it. "We bring our whole lives to them. Every loss, every joy, every mistake. The books haven't changed, but we have." We wandered through the store for over an hour, pulling books from shelves, reading passages to each other, arguing good-naturedly about the merit of various authors. I discovered he had a weakness for mystery novels and considered Agatha Christie a literary genius. He discovered I secretly loved science fiction, despite my librarian's tendency to recommend literary fiction. "I can't believe you've never read Ursula K. Le Guin," I said, scandalized. "She's a Portland legend." I know. It's embarrassing." He held up his hands in surrender. "Add it to my list of failures." "What else is on that list?" I asked, surprising myself with the boldness of the question. He was quiet for a moment, his expression growing serious. "Not telling my wife I loved her enough before the cancer took her. Spending too many years being the person I thought I should be instead of who I was. Taking this long to work up the courage to try again." The honesty of his answer made my throat tight. "When did she die?" 5 years ago. "And you? Your profile said recently widowed." 8 years. He nodded, understanding. "They tell you it gets easier. I'm not sure it does. It just gets different." "Yes," I said softly. "Different." We left Powell's with 2 books each. I'd insisted on buying him The Left Hand of Darkness and walked to the tea shop across the street. Over cups of Earl Grey and lemon scones, the conversation deepened. He told me about his 38 years teaching high school English, about the students who stayed in touch and the ones he still wondered about his daughter, Thessaly, who was a lawyer in Seattle and called him every Sunday, about how after his wife died, he'd spent 2 years barely functioning, teaching on autopilot, until one day a student asked him why he didn't seem to love books anymore. "That question woke me up," he said. "I realized I'd been sleepwalking through my life. So I retired, started actually living again, started reading for pleasure instead of just for curriculum, started hiking, started being present." "Is that when you joined the dating site?" I asked. He shook his head. "That was 6 months ago. Thessaly created the profile for me, actually. She said if I was going to spend the rest of my life alone, The least I could do was make it a choice rather than a default. My daughter said something similar, I admitted. Smart daughters. Annoying daughters, I corrected, and we both laughed. He asked me about my work at the library, and I found myself telling him things I hadn't told anyone, about the subtle joy of connecting the right person with the right book, about the regular patrons whose names I knew and whose reading habits I tracked, about how the library felt like a sanctuary in an increasingly chaotic world. You light up when you talk about it, he observed. I suppose I do, I said, slightly embarrassed. Douglas used to tease me about it. He'd say I loved books more than people. Did you? I considered the question seriously. No, but books were safer. They had beginnings and endings. They made sense in a way people often don't. Corwin leaned back in his chair, studying me with those thoughtful eyes. Can I tell you something that might be too honest for a first date? My heart rate quickened. Yes. I'm scared to death right now. I haven't felt this interested in someone since my wife, and it terrifies me. Because at our age, Marvella, the stakes are different. We don't have decades to waste on false starts. We don't have time to play games or move slowly or pretend we don't care when we do. I couldn't breathe. Everything he was saying echoed my own unspoken fears. And at the same time, he continued, we carry so much history, so much grief and joy and complication. Learning to make room for another person at this stage feels almost impossible, like trying to fit a new piece into a completed puzzle. So why try? I asked softly. He smiled, and there was sadness in it, but also hope. Because the alternative is spending whatever time we have left alone. Because life is short and getting shorter. Because when I got your message saying you'd meet me today, I felt something I thought I'd never feel again. Possibility. I felt tears building behind my eyes. I'm scared too, I whispered. I'm scared of getting hurt. I'm scared of betraying Douglas's memory. I'm scared that I'm too old and too set in my ways and too broken to do this. What if we're scared together? He suggested. What if we take this slowly and honestly and see what happens? I looked at this man I just met, this stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger at all, and made the decision that would change everything. I'd like that, I said. The next 3 months were unlike anything I'd experienced in decades. Corwin and I fell into a pattern of seeing each other twice a week, Wednesday afternoons and Sunday mornings. We were both careful to maintain our own lives, our own routines. I still went to book club, where I said nothing about Corwin, despite my friend's suspicious glances at my improved mood. He still hiked with his men's group and called his daughter every Sunday evening. But those moments together became the highlights of my week. We went to museums and argued about art. We took long walks along the river, stopping frequently because my knees bothered me and he needed to catch his breath. We cooked dinner at his place, a small house in Selwood with a wild garden and a cat named Fitzgerald. We attended a lecture on climate change and spent 2 hours afterward debating solutions over wine. And slowly, carefully, we told each other our stories. I told him about Douglas, not just the sanitized version I'd been telling people for years, but the truth, about how much I'd loved him and how difficult he could be, about the fights we'd had and the compromises we'd made, about the way he'd snored and left his socks everywhere and made me laugh until I cried, about the guilt I felt now, wondering if I'd loved him enough, if I'd paid enough attention, if I'd truly appreciated what we had before it was gone. Corwin listened without judgment, without trying to fix or minimize or compare. And then he told me about Lenora, his wife, about her fierce intelligence and her battle with ovarian cancer, about the 2 years of treatments and hope and devastating setbacks, about holding her hand as she died and feeling like he was drowning. I thought I died with her, he said one rainy afternoon as we sat in his living room, Fitzgerald purring on his lap. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. I couldn't imagine ever feeling whole again. What changed? I asked. Time, partly, and therapy, which I resisted for embarrassingly long. But mostly, I realized that Lenora wouldn't want me to stop living. She made me promise, actually, at the end. She said, Corwin, you're going to shut down after I'm gone. You're going to retreat into books and teaching and convince yourself that's enough. Don't do that. Please, don't do that. Did you tell her you wouldn't? I lied and said I'd try, but I didn't really try. Not for years. Not until recently. He looked at me. Not until I read your profile and thought, maybe, maybe it's possible. These conversations, these deep, honest excavations of our past, created an intimacy I hadn't expected. We weren't just getting to know each other. We were bearing witness to each other's entire lives. But there were also lighter moments. Corwin had a dry sense of humor that caught me off guard. He did impressions of his former students. He told terrible jokes. One Sunday morning, he showed up at my apartment with a bag of pastries and a ukulele he found at a yard sale. I'm going to learn to play this, he announced. I'm going to be one of those annoying old men who plays ukulele at parties. You don't go to parties, I pointed out. Then I'll play for you. You can be my audience of one. He was terrible at it, gloriously, enthusiastically terrible. But watching him try, laughing at his mistakes, not taking himself too seriously, it reminded me that life didn't have to be so heavy all the time. And then there was the physical aspect, which terrified me. We moved slowly. The first time Corwin held my hand, we'd been walking along the waterfront, and it started to rain. He took my hand to help me over a puddle, and then simply didn't let go. My heart hammered. My palm grew sweaty. I felt like a teenager. Is this okay? He asked quietly. Yes, I managed. It's okay. The first time he kissed me, we were at his house, cooking dinner. I was stirring pasta sauce, and he was setting the table, and suddenly he was behind me, his hand gentle on my shoulder. Marvella, he said softly. I turned, and he was looking at me with such tenderness that I couldn't breathe. I'd very much like to kiss you, he said, but only if you want that too. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and he kissed me, gently, carefully, as if I might break. And I kissed him back, and felt something I thought was gone forever, desire. But I also felt fear, because my body was 67 years old. It bore the marks of age and gravity and childbirth and life. The thought of him seeing me, really seeing me, filled me with terror. We didn't rush. We spent weeks just kissing, holding each other, learning the topography of each other's faces and hands. And one night, about 3 months after our first date, as we sat on his couch watching the rain, he said, I want you to know that I find you beautiful, completely and utterly beautiful, and whenever you're ready, if you're ready, I would be honored to show you how beautiful I think you are. I started crying. I couldn't help it. I'm old, Corwin. My body is old. So is mine. He took my hand. I have a scar from a triple bypass. I take medication for cholesterol and blood pressure. Parts of me don't work as well as they used to. But I'm still here, and so are you. That's what matters. That night, for the first time in 8 years, I was intimate with someone. It was awkward and tender and nothing like I remembered with Douglas. Because Corwin wasn't Douglas. We were two older people with older bodies figuring out how to be together. We laughed at our stiffness. We adjusted positions. We took breaks. We were patient with each other. And it was beautiful. Not despite our age, but because of it. Because we brought patience and acceptance and gratitude to every touch. Afterward, lying in his bed with rain pattering against the window, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. But of course, it wasn't all simple. The first complication was my daughters. I'd avoided telling them about Corwin, partly because I wasn't sure what to say, partly because I feared their judgment. But 3 months in, Camille noticed my improved mood and increased absences. "Mom," she said during one of our Sunday dinners at her house, "is something going on? You seem different." I took a deep breath. "I've been seeing someone." The table went silent. Jocelyn nearly dropped her fork. Camille's husband, Marcus, suddenly became very interested in his plate. My grandchildren, blessedly, continued their chatter, oblivious to the adult drama. "Seeing someone?" Camille repeated. "Like dating?" "Yes, dating." Jocelyn recovered first. "That's wonderful, Mom. Who is he? How did you meet?" But Camille's face had gone carefully neutral, her lawyer face. "How long has this been going on?" "About 3 months." 3 months? And you didn't tell us? Pause. I felt defensive anger rising. "I'm allowed to have a private life, Camille." "Of course you are. The 3 months is a long time. We had no idea. What if something had happened? What if—" She stopped herself. "What if what?" I challenged. "What if he'd hurt me? What if I'd made a mistake? What if you're moving too fast?" Camille said quietly. "Dad's only been gone 8 years." And there it was, the real issue. I set down my napkin. "Camille, I loved your father deeply. His death nearly destroyed me, but I'm still here. I'm still alive, and I refuse to apologize for trying to find some happiness." "I'm not asking you to apologize," Camille said, but her voice wavered. I miss Dad. And the idea of you with someone else." Jocelyn reached across the table and took Camille's hand. "Cam, this isn't about you. This is Mom's life." "I know that," Camille said, tears now openly streaming. "I know. I'm being selfish. I'm not ready." I moved to sit beside her, pulling her into a hug. "You don't have to be ready. This isn't about replacing your father or forgetting him. Corwin knows about Dad. We talk about him. He has his own late wife. We're both carrying our histories with us." Eventually, after many tears and more conversation, Camille agreed to meet Corwin. We arranged a casual lunch at a neutral restaurant. I was more nervous than I'd been on my first date with Corwin himself. The lunch was adequate. Camille was polite, but cool. She asked Corwin appropriate questions about his career and his family. She smiled at the right moments, but I could feel the wall she'd erected, the judgment she was withholding. Afterward, as Corwin and I walked to our cars, he said gently, "She's protecting you, and probably protecting her father's memory. Give her time. What if she never comes around?" He stopped walking and turned to face me. "Then you'll have to decide what matters more to you, her approval or your own happiness. I hope you won't have to make that choice, but you might." The second complication was my own fear. About 4 months into our relationship, Corwin caught a bad cold that turned into bronchitis. For 2 weeks, I helped take care of him, bringing him soup, picking up his medications, sitting with him while he slept. And I was terrified every moment, because I could see, with visceral clarity, where this was heading. We were both in our 70s. Our bodies were declining, however slowly. One of us would get sick, really sick. One of us would die first, and whoever was left would go through the devastation of loss all over again. One night, as I sat by Corwin's bedside, watching him sleep fitfully, I had a panic attack. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. I had to walk outside into the cold November air and force myself to take deep breaths. Was I crazy to do this? To willingly sign up for more loss? When Corwin recovered, I tried to distance myself. I canceled our next 2 dates with vague excuses. I didn't return his calls promptly. I told myself I was being smart, protecting myself. But I was miserable. Finally, he showed up at my apartment on a Sunday morning. I opened the door to find him standing there with coffee and pastries and a serious expression. "We need to talk," he said. I let him in. We sat at my kitchen table, and he said, "You're pulling away. I understand why. I'm scared too." "I can't do this," I said, the words tumbling out. "I can't watch someone I love die again. I can't survive that again." "You might not have to," he said gently. I might die first. That doesn't help. I know, but Marvella, here's the truth. One way or another, you're going to experience more loss. If not me, then your friends, your siblings, if you have them, eventually your daughters. Loss is coming. It's part of life, especially at our age. So why make it worse by caring more? Because caring more also means living more. He reached across the table and took my hand. These past months with you have been the happiest I've been in 5 years. Every Wednesday and Sunday, I wake up excited. When I read something interesting, my first thought is, I want to tell Marvella about this. When something makes me laugh, I imagine your reaction. You've made me feel alive again. But for how long? I whispered. 5 years, 10 if we're lucky? I don't know. But I'd rather have 5 truly lived years with you than 20 lonely years without you. Wouldn't you? And he was right. God help me. He was right. Because as terrifying as the thought of losing him was, the thought of going back to my life before him, the numbness, the going through the motions, was worse. I'm so scared, I admitted. I know. So am I. Let's be scared together. After that conversation, something shifted. We stopped pretending this was casual. We stopped holding back. Corwin met my daughters properly. Family dinners where he patiently answered Camille's increasingly friendly questions and charmed Jocelyn with his stories. He played with my grandchildren, getting down on the floor, despite his arthritis, to build block towers and read stories. I met Thessaly when she visited from Seattle. She took me aside at dinner and said, I haven't seen my dad this happy since before Mom got sick. Thank you for that. We started making plans together. Small ones, at first. Tickets to a concert in 3 months, a weekend trip to the coast in the spring. Then larger ones. Corwin suggested we take a trip to Scotland the following year, visiting the places he'd always wanted to see. I know it's a year away, he said, and anything could happen, but I want to have things to look forward to with you. We also started having the practical conversations that people our age need to have. We talked about our wills, our healthcare directives, our financial situations. We discussed what we would want if one of us became seriously ill. It wasn't romantic, but it was necessary. If I have a stroke and end up unable to care for myself, Corwin said one afternoon, I don't want you to feel obligated to become my caregiver. That's not fair to ask. What if I want to? I countered. Then we'll figure it out together. But I need you to promise me something. You won't sacrifice your own well-being for mine. Promise me. I promised, though I wasn't sure I could keep it. We also navigated the delicate question of living arrangements. Neither of us wanted to give up our independence entirely, but spending nights apart became increasingly difficult. We settled on a compromise. We would keep our separate places, but spend most nights together, alternating between houses. Is this what modern dating looks like at 70? I asked one night as we lay in his bed. I have no idea. I think we're making it up as we go along. And we were. There was no roadmap for this. No guidebook for falling in love after 60. We were writing our own rules, making our own mistakes, finding our own way. The crisis came on a Tuesday morning in February, a year and 4 months after our first date. I was at the library when Thessaly called. Her voice was tight with controlled panic. Marvella, Dad's in the hospital. He collapsed during his hike this morning. They think it might be his heart. The world tilted. I somehow made it to my supervisor's office, somehow explained that I needed to leave immediately, somehow drove to the hospital without crashing. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. This was it. This was the loss I'd been terrifying myself about. It was happening. I found Thessaly in the cardiac unit waiting room, her face pale, her lawyer's composure cracking around the edges. What happened? I asked, pulling her into a hug. They don't know yet. He's getting tests. They mentioned possible heart attack, maybe arrhythmia. The paramedics said he was lucky. Another hiker found her right away and called 911. We waited. Hours passed in that particular hell of hospital waiting rooms, where time moves differently, and every footstep makes you look up, hoping for news. When the doctor finally came out, her expression was carefully neutral. Mr. Fletcher is stable. He had a significant cardiac event, what we call unstable angina. His heart is damaged, but not as badly as it could have been. We're going to keep him for a few days, run more tests, likely adjust his medications. Can we see him? Thessaly asked. Yes, but only for a few minutes. He needs rest. Corwin looked small in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors and IVs. But when he saw me, he smiled weakly. I'm sorry, he said. This isn't how I planned to spend our Tuesday. I couldn't speak. I just took his hand and held it, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steadiness of his pulse. Don't cry, he whispered. I'm still here. But I couldn't stop crying, because I'd seen it now, how fragile this all was, how quickly it could end. Over the next few days, as Corwin recovered in the hospital, I had to confront some hard truths. Thessaly and I took turns staying with him, and during one of our overlapping shifts, she said something that struck me. You love him. It wasn't a question. I nodded. He loves you too. He told me before the anesthesia for his angiogram, said if anything went wrong, I should make sure you knew how much it would meant to him. Fresh tears started. I'm so scared, Thessaly. I know, but can I tell you something? When my mom was dying, she was so worried about Dad being alone. She made me promise to make sure he didn't just give up on life. And for years, he did anyway. He was just going through the motions. But then he met you, and he came back. He started living again. So yeah, I'm scared too. I'm scared of losing him. But I'm grateful he got to feel this kind of love again before whatever happens. When Corwin came home from the hospital, the dynamic shifted. He was weaker, more cautious. He had new medications to take, dietary restrictions to follow, limitations on his activities. No more long hikes, no more lifting heavy things, more frequent doctor's appointments, and I had a choice to make. I could step back, protect myself, maintain some distance, or I could step forward, all the way in, knowing full well what I was signing up for. I thought about what Corwin had said months ago, about wanting 5 truly lived years rather than 20 lonely ones. I chose to step forward. The months following Corwin's heart episode changed us both. We became more intentional about our time together, less willing to let small annoyances or disagreements create distance between us. We also became more open with the people in our lives. I stopped hiding our relationship or downplaying it. When my book club friends asked about Corwin, I told them honestly, I love him. I didn't think I could love again at my age, but I do. Camille finally accepted our relationship fully after the hospital scare. She showed up at Corwin's house one evening with a casserole and an apology. I was being protective of a memory, she said. But you're not a memory, Mom. You're here, you're alive, and you deserve to be happy. Dad would want that. The 3 of us talked for hours that night, about Douglas, about Lenora, about the guilt and fear and joy of loving again. Camille cried and laughed, and finally, truly accepted Corwin into our family. Corwin and I also started talking about the future more seriously, not in a presumptuous way, but in a practical one. I've been thinking, he said one Sunday morning as we drank coffee on his porch, watching birds at the feeder, about what we want these next years to look like, however many we get. And I don't want to waste time on things that don't matter. I don't want to stay silent when I should speak. I don't want to hold back affection or assume you know how I feel. Because, Marvella, life is so damn short. What do you want? I asked softly. More mornings like this, more bookstore visits, more ridiculous arguments about literature, more of your laugh, more of you. He took my hand. I know we've been dancing around this, keeping our separate apartments, maintaining independence, and if that's what you need, I understand. But I want you to know, I would marry you tomorrow if you were open to it. Not because I think we need a piece of paper, but because I want to declare to the world that you're the person I choose. Every day, I choose you. My heart hammered. That's quite a speech for a Sunday morning. I've been practicing it for 3 weeks. I laughed, then grew serious. I'm scared of marriage. It feels like tempting fate, like declaring permanence when we both know how impermanent everything is. Everything is impermanent, he agreed. That's exactly why we should celebrate what we have while we have it. I thought about Douglas, about our marriage. I'd loved him, but I'd also taken him for granted. I'd assumed we had forever, and then forever ended abruptly on a Tuesday afternoon. I looked at Corwin, this man who'd walked into my life when I thought the interesting parts were over. This man who read poetry to me and made bad jokes and held my hand during scary movies. This man whose heart was literally damaged, but who still had the courage to offer it to me completely. Yes, I said, yes, I'll marry you. He looked stunned. Really? Really? Life is short. Let's not waste any more of it being careful. We got married 3 months later, in a small ceremony in Corwin's garden with only our daughters, Thessaly, a few close friends, and my grandchildren present. I wore a simple blue dress. Corwin wore a suit that Thessaly had helped him pick out. The officiant was a retired judge, a friend of Corwin's from his teaching days. We didn't write traditional vows. Instead, we each read a poem we'd chosen. Corwin read Yeats. When you are old and gray and full of sleep, his voice broke on the final lines, and I cried openly. I read Mary Oliver. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Afterward, Camille stood up and said, when my dad died, I thought my mom had died with him in some way. I was wrong. She was just hibernating, waiting for the right moment to bloom again. Corwin, thank you for being that moment. Thank you for reminding her and all of us that life doesn't end at 60 or 70 or any age. It just changes. We held the reception in the same garden. Nothing fancy, just food and wine and laughter. My grandchildren ran around with Fitzgerald, who tolerated them with feline patience. Music played. Stories were told. At one point, Corwin pulled out his ukulele, he'd been taking lessons, and played an absolutely terrible rendition of Somewhere Over the Rainbow that had everyone laughing. That night, back at what was now our shared home, we decided to live in his house. Corwin and I sat in the garden under the stars. What are you thinking? He asked. That I'm 70 years old, and this is my second wedding, and it feels more momentous than my first. Not because I didn't love Douglas. I did. But because I know now how precious this is. How rare. He pulled me closer. Do you know what I love most about finding love at our age? What? We have no illusions. We know exactly what we're getting into. We know that bodies fail and time is limited, and nothing is guaranteed. We're choosing each other anyway. That's real love. Love with eyes wide open. And he was right. This wasn't the naive love of youth, built on assumptions of immortality and endless tomorrows. This was love forged in the knowledge of mortality, sweetened by the understanding of how easily it could end. We've been married for almost 2 years now. In that time, we've had challenges, health scares, family complications, the normal friction of two independent people learning to fully share their lives. But we've also had incredible joy. We took that trip to Scotland. We spent 2 weeks wandering through Edinburgh and the Highlands, holding hands as we toured castles and walked along lochs. We got tired easily, needed frequent rest breaks, went to bed early, and it was perfect. We've created new traditions. Sunday morning coffee in the garden, Wednesday night cooking experiments, some successful, many not. Monthly game nights with my daughters and their families. We've supported each other through difficult times. When my sister died last year, Corwin held me through the grief, knowing exactly what to say and when to say nothing. When his arthritis flared so badly he could barely walk, I helped him without making him feel diminished. We've learned to fight fairly, to apologize quickly, to not let resentments fester. At our age, we don't have time for passive aggression or silent treatments. And yes, we've faced reality together. We've updated our wills to include each other. We've had conversations about what we want if one of us develops dementia or becomes seriously ill. We've made peace with the fact that one of us will likely have to watch the other die, and the other will have to die knowing they're leaving someone behind. It's not morbid to acknowledge these things. It's honest. And that honesty makes every moment we have more precious. So what have I learned about finding love after 60? About taking the risk of opening your heart when you thought it was closed forever? Let me share what I've discovered, in case you find yourself where I was 3 years ago, alone, afraid, convinced the best parts of your life are behind you. First, you are not too old for love. I know society tells us that romance is for the young, that at a certain age we should settle for companionship or solitude. This is a lie. Your heart doesn't retire. Your capacity for connection doesn't expire. You may move differently, look different, love differently than you did at 20 or 30 or 40. But you can still love deeply, passionately, truly. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise. Second, grief and love can coexist. I was so afraid that loving Corwin would mean betraying Douglas's memory. But I've learned that my heart is big enough for both. I still love Douglas. I still miss him. I still think about him almost every day. But I also love Corwin. These feelings don't cancel each other out. They exist simultaneously, and that's okay. If you've loved and lost, know that loving again doesn't diminish what came before. It honors it by showing that you learned how to love deeply and you're brave enough to do it again. Third, be honest about your fears. Don't pretend you're not scared. Don't act braver than you feel. When I finally admitted to Corwin how terrified I was of loss, of vulnerability, of my aging body, it brought us closer. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's courage. Share your fears with the person you're with, or hoping to be with. Let them be scared with you. Fourth, your body is not your enemy. I spent months dreading the moment Corwin would see me fully, convinced my 70-year-old body would repulse him. But he saw me with loving eyes, just as I saw him. Our bodies tell our stories. Every scar, every wrinkle, every mark. They're evidence that we've lived, survived, endured. Find someone who sees your body as a map of your life rather than a collection of flaws. Fifth, don't waste time on games. At our age, we don't have the luxury of playing it cool or waiting 3 days to return a call or pretending we don't care. If you like someone, tell them. If you want to see them, ask. If you love them, say it. Life is too short for unnecessary mystery. Be direct, be honest, be genuine. Sixth, practical matters are romantic. It might not seem romantic to discuss healthcare directives or financial planning or what you want if you become seriously ill, but this is how you show love at our age. By facing reality together, by making plans that protect each other, by having the hard conversations. Don't avoid these discussions. They're acts of love. Seventh, your family might struggle with this. Give them time and grace, but don't let their discomfort stop you from living your life. My daughter Camille needed months to adjust to the idea of me with someone other than her father. That was her journey, not mine. I could be patient and understanding, but I couldn't let her grief control my choices. Your children, if you have them, may need to grieve the fantasy of their parents reuniting or the exclusivity of their late parents' memory. That's valid, but so is your right to happiness. Eighth, choose someone who makes you want to be alive. Don't settle for someone who's just pleasant company. Don't accept fine or adequate. Find someone who makes you excited about tomorrow. Someone who makes you laugh. someone who challenges you and comforts you and sees you fully. You deserve more than someone to sit silently with while you wait out your remaining years. Ninth, accept that loving at our age means accepting the nearness of loss. This is perhaps the hardest lesson. Every day with Corwin, I'm aware that it could end. His heart is damaged. My body is aging. Anything could happen at any time. This knowledge sits in my chest like a stone, but it also makes me grateful for every ordinary moment, every shared cup of coffee, every book discussion, every time he reaches for my hand. The shadow of mortality makes the light more precious. 10th, it's worth it. All of it. The fear, the vulnerability, the risk, the pain that will inevitably come. It's worth it. I would rather have these years with Corwin, knowing how it will end, than have lived the rest of my life in the safe, numb cocoon I built around myself. Love at our age is love with eyes wide open. It's love that knows exactly how much it costs and chooses to pay the price anyway. So here I am, 3 years after I created that dating profile, 70 years old now, married to a man I didn't know existed 3 years ago, living a life I couldn't have imagined. Is it perfect? No, we have our struggles. Corwin's heart condition means constant vigilance. My arthritis has gotten worse. We both move more slowly, tire more easily, need more help than we like to admit. But it's real, it's honest, it's full. This morning, I woke up to Corwin reading beside me in bed, his reading glasses sliding down his nose the way they always do. Fitzgerald was curled up at our feet. Rain was tapping against the window, and I felt something that had been absent from my life for so long: contentment. "What are you reading?" I asked sleepily. He showed me the cover, The Left Hand of Darkness, the book I'd bought him on our first date. "You're finally reading it?" I wanted to remember that day, when I was so nervous I almost canceled, when I didn't know if you'd show up, when I had no idea you'd end up being the person who made me remember how to be alive. I reached for his hand, lacing my fingers through his. I almost didn't show up, you know. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, telling myself I was too old for this, that it was foolish, that I should go home. What made you come in? I thought about spending the rest of my life wondering what if. That seemed worse than any awkwardness or rejection. He kissed my hand. Thank goodness for your courage. Thank goodness for yours. We lay there in comfortable silence, and I thought about all the people out there who might be where I was 3 years ago, lonely, afraid, convinced that love was something that happened to other people, to younger people, to people whose lives were still ahead of them instead of mostly behind them. And I wanted to tell them, it's not too late. It's never too late. Your life is not over. Your story is not finished. There are still chapters to be written, adventures to be had, love to be found and given. Yes, it's scary. Yes, it's risky. Yes, you might get hurt. But the alternative, living whatever time you have left in safe isolation, protecting a heart that's meant to be used, that's the real tragedy. So if you're 60 or 70 or 80 and you think your chance for love has passed, I'm here to tell you it hasn't. If you're widowed or divorced or never married and you think you're too old to start now, you're not. If you're afraid of looking foolish or getting rejected or having your heart broken again, be afraid and do it anyway. Because here's what I've learned. Love doesn't retire. It doesn't have an age limit. It doesn't expire. It just waits, patient and persistent, for you to be brave enough to try again. And when you do, when you take that terrifying step toward possibility, you might just discover that the best chapter of your life was waiting for you all along. My name is Marvella. I am 70 years old, and I am deeply, gratefully, terrifyingly in love. And if I can do it, so can you.